Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. Kathleen and I just got done with a conversation with our guest, David Dalton, and we are really excited to bring that to you. But first, we wanted to let you know what's going on with the School for Flower Essence Studies because we've got some courses that are open for enrollment. And the first one is we've got another cohort coming up for our FES Professional Flower Essence Practitioner Certification Program coming up on May 1st. And you want to talk a little bit about that, Kathleen?
Yeah, this course is headed by our Ruth Toledo Altschuler, who is one of our partners, and she has been teaching practitioners for decades and holds the um, privilege of being able to teach this in-depth program as it has been created by the Flower Essence Society. It is a really in-depth course that will absolutely set you in really good stead as you develop your professional practice. And as we prepare to get this new cohort rolling, we wanted to let you know that there is still time. If you're really new to this, if you haven't had any foundational training yet, it'd be really worthwhile for you to get a little bit of that under your belt before this gets rolling.
Yeah, and the Bach Flower Foundations course is now available for as an on-demand course, so you can get it immediately and just start learning. And it's a really comprehensive foundational course that's going to set you up for as a basis for any other kind of flower essence training you want to get in the future. So whether you just want to use flower essences for yourselves, which is it's just perfect for, or you want to go on and study other kinds of flower essences, more lines, learn how to become a practitioner. This is that foundational piece that you can, take now and then use it as um, your prerequisite for future courses. So we are excited to be able to offer that now as an on-demand where you can take it anytime and have lifetime access to it.
Thanks for being here with us. Go ahead and check out floweressencestudies.com, where you can find out everything you want to know about these courses. And also, while you're there, join the mailing list if you're not already on it, because then you can have access to our monthly free live chats where the community gets together and talks about a topic of interest. So we hope to see you there. And thanks for listening. Welcome, welcome, flower lovers. Today we are blessed with the presence of a friend of the program, David Dalton. David is getting ready to release his new book, Advanced Flower Essence Healing. It's a really exciting book. I've had the chance to glance at a preview copy, and I really appreciate his perspective, and we just really wanted to have him on the program. We are going to be talking about some of the really cool ways that David has been figuring out flower essences over all the decades that he's been working with them, and some really unique perspectives on flower essence therapy or flower essence healing. So thank you, and Ro.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. And I was so happy to see this book come out. For those of you who haven't seen our previous podcast with David, it was episode 37, and we talked a lot about his adventures in making essences and, in the field and how he got started. And we did talk about how he is a teacher of both Kathleen and I, a valued teacher for both of us. And in fact, for me, taking your practitioner training was the first in-depth practitioner training that I took it was about 9 years ago. So really made an impact on me. And this book is, it really reflects a lot of what that program was about and a lot of the philosophy and ways of thinking about flower essences that David has. So now that it's out in a book, it's really exciting. And to just give a little bit of of who David is in a bio. He's a pioneer in the flower essence field. He has worked as a flower essence practitioner, producer, researcher, and teacher since the 1980s. He's a founder and principal of Delta Gardens, a center for flower essence study and research, and the originator of the partnership energy transmission, a process for the relief of trauma, anxiety, and physical symptoms. He lives and practices in New Hampshire. So, welcome back, David. We're really glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here. Very grateful that you invited me.
As we can just get started, can you tell us a little bit about, what the spur was to get you to write this book? I mean, writing a book is such a huge expenditure of energy and time, and you really felt like there was something that you had to offer to the field. There's a lot of books out there, but yours is, as I've seen it, is really a unique offering. Would you like to share your ideas on how you see this field?
How I see the field of flower essences.
Well, you have a different approach to working with flower essences than you would find in pretty much any other book. And that's kind of that's kind of what I'm leading with because you have a different way of seeing the essences. I love the way that you're categorizing them in the book and organizing them and just the way you practice is very different than where a lot of other essence makers or writers are coming from.
I guess I would say that I felt that the flower essence world needed some structure. Some, I mean, there's a lot of people practicing flower essences all over the world, and they're doing it in different ways, and many of them following the Bach paradigm. So I felt that, giving some structure rather than having it all be intuitive or opinion based would be a contribution. So for instance, how do you know what a flower essence is once you've made it? And I feel like there are 6 or 7 different ways of going into a research about the flower essence to decide what it's for. Before the flower essence has a name and it has a purpose. It has someone has discovered what it's for. It's really valueless. So it's really that work that I think is key. And I feel like that, for instance, needs some structure. And so there are many ways of interpreting flower essence that sometimes people just get an intuitive sense. This is what the flower essence is for, and that's it. And other people get a transmission, from, as a medium, and that's what the flower essence for. But I feel like including all of the parts of the brain in the investigation of the flower is important. And the last step being like you give it to a lot of people. When I first started working with flower essences, I would get a group of people together as a focus group, and we would give them all an essence and have them write down what their experience was and then have them take it for a week. So I basically paid these people to do that because, I wanted to structure that kind of process. So anyway, that's a little bit about what I wanted to do. It wasn't so much capture my life work, but it was like, okay, so I've learned some things about this that I can put in a sequence for people that's really easy to understand and read and appeals to both the left and the right brain. So
I think that's why it appeals to me because um, I also believe that these flower essences they're communicating with us in all of these facets and all of these ways, and some people might have an easier time understanding one facet versus another, but if you can look at the whole, then you can get the nuance of that essence, and it kind of seems to reinforce itself. And so what I'm thinking of is in terms of when you're looking at the, the plant signature, how it's growing, what it's growing next to, what it looks like as far as the shape of the flower, the color of the flower. And one thing in your work you also talk about and a lot about is the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, elements that can show himself in the flower and how that can relate, and then also the chakras. But what I really appreciate is that you also are always bringing in the intuitive experience. So there's these sort of this framework about how to look at things, but there's always also the intuitive experience. And you've have a lot of examples in the book, about some of the people, what the experiences were, the people that you gave it to, some of your kind of testing, your focus groups. And maybe you want to give an example of something that happened with that.
So I remember we were doing the borage flower essence, which has 5 petals and is blue. And one of the things is both that structure, the 5 pointed and the blue, uh, intuitively spell out stability. And so here's a group of 30 people, and I'd say 28 of them had experiences that they named as feeling settled, grounded, calm, relaxed. And then 2 people got the opposite: excited, anxious, uh, not settled. So anyway, that's an example. And I put in those 2 people because not always do we get something absolute. Sometimes we get another question, which is, why might that happen? And my answer over time has been, looking at this kind of thing, is that sometimes there's something in the way of moving into stability, and that thing will surface first. And so that's why these essences that are very stabilizing, can also cause some kind of discomfort. That's another thing about intuition. It's like this whole field was born through not just intuition, but a combination of science and intuition. Dr. Bach was a doctor and a scientist, and he had a strong intuition. So what we have is this gift of this whole field that combines those. So my feeling is we can't lose either one of those. We're living in a scientific world, and people, I think, need to reclaim and understand and respect and use intuition. But I think this scientific world is challenging, the intuition, like, well, show me that, what do you have for proof? One time I was talking to a retired doctor about flower essences. Of course, he had never heard about them. And the first thing he asked me was, where are the double-blind experiments, for this? And I said, well, so far, there aren't any so far. And what about your double-blind experiment, that have produced results, that have been false? Anyway, he couldn't answer that.
Well, there is that assumption of, this baseline assumption in Western culture that, the word science equals truth. And science is an inquiry. It should be an inquiry. It's always questioning and like, this result is different, and it should be, where that curiosity rather than the calcification of the illusion of the double-blind trial resulting in truth. It's like, well, it depends on who held it. It depends on who was involved. there's a lot of more flexibility in these things than is presented as, oh, well, that's this perfect trial that, it's like, well, what was the design of the trial? And yeah, I mean, it's really, it's kind of too bad that flower essences haven't received, more attention along those lines. But also, like you were saying with this case with the borage testing, no individual is a blank slate. The essence will touch certain parts of them or it won't. And to me, I really appreciate that you bring that into your discussion in the book about, whether somebody just needs a situational remedy or whether they have something going on that's deeper. And how, if something isn't fitting, it isn't, you can't make it feel more easy if it's something that's a long-term or long-standing or a traumatic foundation. I would be really interested to hear, what your thoughts are on that. Like where in these two cases, like where the borage didn't make them feel happier and lighter. Like, so what's up with that?
I think the whole issue is context. And Dr. Bach, working in the scientific and the medical field, saw the shortcomings of it and said that you can't treat physical disease as a physical thing because it has its origin someplace else. And so what he did was expanded the context to include the personality. I think every time we expand the context, we get a different answer. So science, if we look at the history of science, we're always discovering something that makes the context bigger. And when it does that, sometimes it disproves something that's been the truth in the past. So I think that this field invites people to look at bigger context in themselves. Dr. Bach said it's the personality. It's in the personality. And we're looking now and going like, well, what is the personality and how is it formed? And so now we have something that a word that Dr. Bach didn't use, which is trauma, which is like everyone is carrying something from the past that's painful somewhere in their system. Sometimes, and it affects things and it affects the health. And so I don't think, I mean, a few decades ago, people would argue about how the emotions affect the health, but I don't think there's an argument anymore. There's a question like, how do they and how do we change them? One of the beautiful things about flower essences is that they can work deeply in the system. They can move things out that up and out that have been there for a long time. They can then invite change into not just the personality, but a person's whole life. One of the things I found early on, working with people in the traditional flower essence way, which is, you kind of find out how they're feeling and what's going on in their lives and where are the difficulties in their life. And you look for an essence or maybe a combination, that will address that. So we don't do that anymore. We don't do that. The inquiry has expanded. It's deeper. Go like, so what's going on in your life? How are your finances? How are your relationships? How is your living situation? How about your friends? How about your relationships? So we look at all of those and we get kind of like a sense of like how the past is affecting the present. And then we go into, well, what is it in the past? And flower essences, I think the power of the essences is their ability to change the present, by going into the past and removing it. So what I found working with people is when I would just address the personality with this combination is they would change. Things in their life would change, which is, to me, was like peculiar back then. Oh, that ache or pain was gone. People started making more money, started like, trimming their belongings and their friendships into this alignment with a new frequency that was running through them. So I think we have something that has a bigger context, and that's really, I think, the horn that we should be blowing. Your life can change if you do the work. When I started, it was like, okay, take this and you'll feel better. And some people didn't feel better. I remember doing study groups with some of my students, and they would come in and they go like, well, I gave this essence to this person and they felt great. And then I gave this and they didn't feel great. I must have done something wrong. And I think right around then we started to learn, like, look, this isn't all about feeling good. It's about, getting into, this whole context of myself and trying to find out what needs to go and what essence will help do that, and what needs to stay and be strengthened, what essences do. So I think I've touched on your question a little bit.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the trauma, that's the speech the presentation you gave on trauma at one of our conferences also, um we didn't mention, but you spoke at um two of our previous conferences, and you gave a great presentation on working a little bit more deeply with trauma and the alchemy of the essences. I wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership energy transmission, because that is definitely a technique unique to your work and what you teach about. And maybe you could describe that a little bit for our listeners.
Okay. There are many ways of taking a flower essence in. And the one that we know the most is, to ingest it. You can also put it in water, put it in bath. There are some wonderful books now about applying it topically on acupuncture points. What I found is that these essences have an intelligence, and that the practitioner can transmit the essences, guide the essences into the energy field using their hands. So partnership energy transmission is really simple. Client takes certain essences, or the practitioner puts the essences on their hands. Client lies down on a table, and then the hands are placed in two different positions, one on either side of the head, and then after 10 minutes on lightly touching the ankles. So this was an experiment at first. It's like, I'm not even sure how this started, but it started through like, well, let's try this, and see what happens. And well, we started seeing results. We started seeing dramatic results. We started seeing dramatic results, physical, mental, emotional results, with trauma. It's one of the things we use with trauma to do a trauma release. It's one of the things we do with anxiety. And it's one of the things we do with illness. So we do this both with people and animals. With animals, we have slightly different approach. We take the essences, put them on the hands, the animals should be lying down or interlap, and put our hands on the hindquarters for 10, 15 minutes. What's really interesting, one time I did a workshop with a whole bunch of animals, and these were all dogs. There were 30 dogs in this, and they were all in crates, and they were all going crazy, and as dogs would in crates when they can't kind of communicate with each other. So what happened was, when we did the partnership treatment, each owner did that. All of the dogs fell asleep. Every one of the dogs fell asleep. So all of this yipping and yapping just turned into this like serenity. And we were working on Lyme disease with dogs, but someone said just to see them fall asleep is worth it.
That's great. And I remember I read that example in the book and thought, I can't imagine that must have been quite something to see, 30 dogs. Um, what you talk about with that technique is that you're really just, it's more an active observation
Yes.
and not, you're not, you're not trying to direct the energy. You're not, it's not, there's no uh affirmation type or there's really nothing to it other, and anybody can do it. It's really about being present and observing what's happening,
It's
right?
it's interesting. What we found is that things start to happen both in your hands and you don't even need to see energy, but you can see things starting to happen in the client through small subtle movements. But what we found was people, besides relaxing and falling asleep, um, had experiences, but we're able to, through that, what you call observation, um, make some kind of contact with an energy. In other words, yes, we don't do anything consciously with our will forces. That's important. But we have to stay present because it's that observation that makes the connection that makes things happen. So if people were, not engaged in the process, I don't think much would happen. So why we call it partnership is like something happens between the practitioner, the essences, the energy of the essences, and the client.
And then you have also developed a way to do it remotely.
Yeah.
And how would you describe that?
Well, here's something that we can't really understand, but we see it happening, and we have to rely on quantum physics and that whole theory of entanglement to explain what's going on. But you can take an essence, and if you're in contact with the person, either over the telephone or through the internet, you can take an essence and you can transmit that essence into the person's field. That will sound like a little bit of uh, metaphysical woo, but to us it's kind of a day-to-day thing. If you want, I have people. So I'm in Hawaii right now, and I've been working with people over the telephone, for 3 months here, lots of them, and that's what we're doing. We're doing this PET technique transmission remotely. So you can take a single essence or a group of essences, and what we do is test for those first and select the essences that way, and then transmit them.
Yeah, and I wanted to say it makes so much sense from the perspective that, as a practitioner, when I create a blend, and I'm working uh, not in person, so it's always mailing the blend to the person, but time after time, they report that they start feeling the effects of it the day I make it, not when they get it and start taking it, but they start to get it, they start to tell me they've been feeling it and feeling the effects of it before they even get it in the mail. So there's definitely something going on there. There's definitely something to that when we're making the blend and I've got the bottles on the table and it's that intention. It's basically the intention is going out, that it's sending it to them. So I could really see how um, doing it just that way might be a way to proceed.
I think we're expanding the context of what we're doing. And when we get results that we don't understand, we have to go try to understand and look. And if there aren't tools in science, then we have to kind of look beyond science. But I don't know. I think science and the whole metaphysical world, and they're all catching up to each other and finding a way of communicating that doesn't separate them.
This is not an unusual situation for me either. And to me, the clearest cases come with my animal work. And like Ro, well, it sounds like you too at the moment, David. Everything's remote. I don't work with people in person or talk to their animals in person. And I cannot tell you how many times the animal always comes into the room at the time of the appointment, pretty much always. They may not stay the entire time, but they always come in because they know that they know that they've gotten their person to make a phone call at that time. But the issues change long before the essence ever gets there. It's like we've created a healing field, we've created some sort of an intentional place, and the plants come through. For me, that's the key, is that we are interfacing with plant intelligence. We think it's in a bottle, but we've just found the connection to it. It's like we've just created the space for it to come through. And that's where the healing takes place, is by inviting these presences, inviting the intelligence of these individual plants and of nature to come into the room and to offer. That's where I feel like the healing takes place. I'm just a matchmaker. I'm just here to help orchestrate things, and then the plants can take over.
We need that orchestrator. We need the person that has the awareness that the plants are living, intelligent things, and that it's not just like you can sit in front of a plant and say, hello, how are you, and get an answer. It's just that when you understand the power and the potency of the plants as essences, and that there is an intelligence, you can then take a back seat and say, well, let's see what is it you can do? What can you do in this kind of situation? I think we're just still, after 40 years of doing this, I still think I'm just scratching the surface, and that there's much more, but we're still in a world where there has to be a way of making flower essences understandable and palpable to people so that they're willing to try them. Mostly I get people who haven't been willing to try them because they feel desperate. There's something in their life that's made them go like, okay, I need something else, and let's try this.
And so much of your practice, over the years, I've been fortunate enough to study with you in person, and seeing and experiencing the partnership technique with my own hands, with my own eyes, with my own hands. It's very clear something's happening. But a lot of your work has always been that connection between the physical and the spiritual, or the physical and the soul, whatever terms we might use. Your early work was, people came to you, like you said, because they were sort of desperate. And people are often in a greater state of desperation when it's a physical challenge that they're facing. Somehow the invisible, the struggles tend to be less motivating somehow. Isn't that an interesting piece?
I'd say 9 out of 10 people who find their way to getting treatment from me have some kind of debilitating physical issue, whether it's some kind of illness. And it just becomes a puzzle, like what things can we do to change this whole thing? How have you gotten here? What are the stresses in your life that have brought you here, and what else about you needs to change for this whole thing to change? And people change. I think that's the most exciting thing about flower essence work, seeing people change in whatever way they need to change. I remember we started working with Lyme disease people, and I'd say about the first 30 people that I saw this pattern. They were all type A people. They were all people who were doing too much in their lives and not taking care of themselves enough. And there were 2 types. Those who said, how soon can you fix me so I can get back to my crazy life. And then those people that said, wow, this has made me slow down and I've learned a lot about myself and I need to change. And it was those people who were easier to work with and who changed more quickly.
Well, and it's like that intersection of the kind of the standard Western model is make that stop, make the pain stop, make whatever it is stop, and then I can get back to doing what I was doing. And instead, you're proposing the possibility that maybe it's the what you've been doing is making you what's going on, and maybe there's a different way to go about the life.
Right. Always a different way. And I always go back to Bach's paradigm, that it's the personality, something in the personality. I mean, he kind of whittled it down to two things. He said, we're here with a sole purpose. And if we're engaged in that and following that path, we're healthy. It said when we start going in other directions, and for sure, the world kind of, at least this culture says, like, you better go in the direction of money or you're going to die. So we need to change that whole thing. We need to help people change whatever direction their personality has taken them. When I say personality, I mean that whole structure that they built from, with emotions and stresses and ideas and desires. All of that is built on something. And when that scaffolding changes and the person starts to starts feeling better, what happens is there's a kind of understanding. There's a reawakening of, wait a minute, this is what I'm doing here. This is what I'm doing here. I've always wanted to be a teacher, and what am I doing here in this computer work? But there are a lot of people who are trapped today. I'd say trapped is one of the biggest issues. People come in, they have, a mortgage and they have kids and they have a job and they're in a place that's untenable and it's starting to show in physical symptoms. And so undoing that is not an easy thing. It takes some patience and time, and it takes a person to kind of reevaluate, and say, like, is this the direction I want to keep going in? It's not working for me. My body's saying that it's not working for me. What's the other direction? So getting out of prison, I think, is one of the biggest challenges for us, helping people out of the prison that they've created for themselves with good intentions and have kind of turned, toxic on them.
It's truly holistic work. It's, the mind, body, spirit is it's all connected. They're not separate things. So it is really interesting how you have navigated this because it's a tricky area to navigate with a modality like flower essences, and yet you've had so many great I mean, you just have had example after example of how effective this modality is for somebody on that level. And I'm wondering what you think about, so there are myriad number of metaphysical sort of new agey books that talk about um, X health condition means this metaphysically, right? So if you have back pain, it means you're not feeling supported. Or if you have this, and like I don't know if you've seen, but there's a lot out there, and there has been for a couple decades now. Um, since you are looking at that in your experience, in your practice, do you see a lot of commonalities between the physical manifestation of things and the underlying more personality, as you say, root cause? Or is it really unique for each individual?
What I do is I observe and collect information and try to determine patterns and relationships. And so for instance, one of the things I saw early on was a lot of women that had sexual trauma in the past had pelvic issues in the present, endometriosis, fibroid tumors, sometimes bone deterioration in the pelvis, sometimes susceptibility to STDs. So, and then, saw that there are essences that move that energy out of the system. And so there can be, the moving of old energy, and there can be relief of a symptom at the same time. So I've seen a lot of relationships between conditions and patterns, personality patterns. And so I see a lot of mouth and jaw and dental things when there's been repression, when control being repressed. A lot of stomach issues when people have had issues with food shaming in the past, or not being nourished, or being breastfed by a mother who was eating something that the person was allergic to. So there's a lot of um, dental things and throat things. So you might say that somewhere between, this lower part of the belly and up here, there's a channel for emotional expression. And I see that, when people suppress something, somewhere along that channel, there can be blockage. It can be either in the stomach, it can be in the heart, it can be in the throat, it can be in the jaw, can be either be in the head also. So those are a couple of things. I began to see relationships, condition, what happened in the past, and flowers. What are the flowers that are needed for that? That's a good question, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate the amount of and the guidance you offer in this book on case taking. That's something that I think that you can learn so much by asking maybe the right questions, or asking questions that elicit more interesting responses than what a typical intake form might offer, of being able to look at what's going on in a global way, and then being able to identify some of those patterns that are showing up. And it's like, okay, might be related to this, might be related to this. And how part of your case taking is to show people how some of these things are interrelated. And I think that's that's a really important insight for people working with flower essences in general. And so I want to encourage them to check out your book, because there's a lot of good stuff in here that obviously we don't have time to go through in any comprehensive sense. But I really wanted to pick up on that piece, because that just seems so important and so fascinating, because it's coming out of, like you say, decades of doing this one-to-one close-up work with people and watching things change, watching patterns change, watching people change their lives as a result of the work that you do with them.
It's I call that first interview the first intervention. Most people have never been asked questions in that sequence to that depth about themselves. What about your past, and what about growing up, and what were your parents like, and how about where were you in the birth order, and what about early accidents or hospitalizations or surgeries, and what were the traumas that happened? What was life like growing up, and how are you doing now? How are you physically? How are you emotionally? How are all of these things in the present that we relate to happiness? And we start making connections. And so I think when people come for a session and they're asked those questions, then then their own context of themselves starts to widen. You can begin to see relationships between things, when there was a big stress and when somebody had an accident, is one thing that we see a lot. It's like, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought that trauma of, let's see, somebody passing away produced this kind of condition.
And your experience in this field and the sheer number of clients you've seen and that your clinic has seen and the research that's come out of it and your focus groups and all of that. I mean, the contribution to this field is immense. So I just want to really thank you for that and let you know how appreciative we are of this work. I also wanted to mention that your book isn't actually out yet, so it's pre-sale mode. I believe it's coming out on April 14th. Is that right?
April 14th. It'll be a joy to see it, because it's taken some time to put it together, to see it, you know, in cover.
Yeah, I bet. And so yeah, anyone listening, um, that, go get the pre-order and give David some love because this book there's nothing else really like it. It's more comprehensive and just goes into real world flower essence therapy, flower essence healing I think like no other book does. It's just so much more than a list of plants and essences and what they can do. So I really think that this is going to be great to have out there in the world as a resource for people. Anyone wanting to become a flower essence practitioner or currently are a flower essence practitioner or just wanting to um, dive deeper, go beyond the surface, of the lists that say this essence does that and trying to figure it out from there. So this is a really great contribution. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So as we come to a completion, or for a completion for now, do you have any parting thought that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I did want to mention the first book that I wrote called Stars of the Meadow, which has 40 different flower essences and their use in depth and in-depth coverage, which I enjoyed writing. I think, we're in a very troubled world now, and finding a place that feels safe and secure requires connecting to something higher. And I think flower essences offer that experience to people where it's not a theoretical or a dogma kind of thing, but there's an experience of connection with something higher. And I think of all of the things that flower essences can do, I think it's probably the most valuable, that we don't fight about or argue about or label, but all of a sudden we have an experience that there's something higher. It's beautiful, it's loving, it's here to help us and can heal and balance us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We've been so privileged to have this time with you and really appreciate your contribution to the field. And thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your work with us. It's really wonderful. Thanks again.